Today I have Hemas in the house. He is the chief who is always there to help. Bill Wilson from the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
I am too. I'm really glad to have you here on the set with me. And I wanted to let the listeners know and the audience know that Hereditary Chief Bill Wilson is one of the people one of the chiefs and our leaders who developed the BC Treaty process. And we're going to be talking about Christy Clark's decision not to reappoint a treaty commissioner and self-governance. Let's start off with the development of the BC Treaty process.
Well, I think the audience should know, as you probably do, that the Indian land claims in the province of British Columbia has been a rallying call since contact. Once we were forced off the land by government and industry and fishing and other resources, the Aboriginal people organized, even though it was against the law at the time to do so, to pursue the land claims issue. Even the Nisga's, for example, went to England before the turn of the century to seek an audience with the Crown to declare their title to the land. So this struggle has gone on since shortly after contact. I mean, our people assisted the non-Indian people who stumbled ashore here, wouldn't have survived had we not been hospitable, and then they treated us as savages, as second-class citizens, and did all the other things which you're very aware of. So, but the Indian people, despite the laws, the potlatch laws and everything else that was proclaimed to prohibit them from organized themselves under the Native Brotherhood of British Columbia, and they continually struggled. And when I was a little kid, like 6, 7 years old, I used to go to Brotherhood meetings. They were the longest Indian organization surviving in this country, and their purpose was land claims, land claims, land claims. That's what you heard from Gosnell, Calder, all the great leaders. It was always about reclaiming our title to the land, but more importantly, reclaiming our access to renewable natural resources. Now, out of that came many Indian organizations, including the North American Indian Brotherhood in the interior, the Southern Vancouver Island Tribal Council, the interior tribes, the Brotherhood, the Nisga'a Tribal Council, and finally they amalgamated in 1969 in Kamloops, 5 of them, to form the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, which sole purpose was the pursuit of land claims, the just resolution of the outstanding grievance known as Aboriginal title and treaty rights. Well, you know, that went south for the winter very quickly because it got co-opted by the Department of Indian Affairs. So other organizations like the Aboriginal Council and the Congress and eventually the Summit emerged, and I was fortunate enough to be the president of the Congress and the Summit. And we were able to convince 2 of the most right-wing conservative governments you could imagine, Van der Zam's and Mulroney's, that they should form a commission that would deal with the outstanding grievance. But it wasn't due to philanthropy on their part or goodwill on their part. We had convinced the business community in the province of British Columbia and nationally that if you didn't settle land claims, the title to the land would be in jeopardy, and you would not be able to develop it because it would not be clear who owned it. And that was really the binding agreement. The Mineral Council, the Mining Council under Tom Waterland and a few other Aboriginal people and ourselves, we went to Van der Zam and told him, you want campaign funds for the next election? You better deal with the land claims issue, because that's the only thing they listen to. It's political pressure, or in that case, it was intimidation. So the Business Council of British Columbia and other people deserve a great deal of pressure or credit, along with the Aboriginal people, for forcing the government, the federal government and the provincial government, to come together and say, okay, let's create a commission. So they did. And they came up with a commission that was composed of 19 principles. Level playing field was one of them, tripartite, equal partners. And then that was about the same time that I got impeached because they didn't like me for some reason. And I went away to Ottawa for a couple of years, and I came back, and sadly, I don't know what happened. The Congress had been changed with different leadership to the Summit. And then when I came back, they had negotiated over a period of about 6 months to a year the agreement in regard to Aboriginal Title Commission. And when I negotiated with Mulroney and Van der Zam, 2 actually good guys, I didn't mind them at all, right? They agreed that we would have 10% or 90% loans or grants, and 10% loans. All right, and then the 19 principles would be there on the table, they all would be lived up to, and it would be a level playing field with all 3 partners being equal. When I came back from Ottawa 2 years later, somebody had negotiated just the opposite. So instead of grants, just about all of it became loans. So 80% of it now is loans. Money, something like, I don't know, $6 billion borrowed by the Indians to pursue the claim.
That has to be repaid, right?
That is supposed to be repaid. And the other thing is that the Department of Indian Affairs took over the process, thanks to what I consider to be weak Indian leadership and complete lack of information on the part of the province. The province never knew what was going on in this process. Still does not know what's going on in this process. And the fact is that the Department of Indian Affairs simply created out of the Department of Indian Affairs their treaty people, who were all former Department of Indian Affairs employees, who were all trained in intimidating and putting Aboriginal people down. They controlled the treaty process. And then not what you see, sadly, now after, I don't know, 20 years or whatever it is, lawyers are the only ones that made any money. And consultants, and many unequipped Indian chiefs who thought they were negotiators. So it's a huge business with no product. Now there's 5 things. The Nishka Agreement, you've got to remember, was negotiated outside the treaty. All right, so this industry has been going on, this suffering industry is going on for so long now, and people have made millions and millions and millions of dollars out of this process, and the conditions of Aboriginal people, which was supposed to be improved by the process, has not changed one iota. In fact, it's gotten worse.
That's why
now we're at the present day, and Christy Clark thinking that, you know, if I can look fiscally conservative, you know, then I can intimidate Indians into submitting to our minimal demands or our minimal requests. And the reality is that what she's done is simply violated a sacred trust. It was agreed 3 equal parties, level playing field, principles, which kind of new to, I guess, people who were in politics. But the reality is now that the summit has laid down for it. The Indian leadership has laid down for it. The federal government loves it because now they know it's in disarray. They had no intention of resigning or signing treaties or allowing the land to take place in terms of transfer. And that's the biggest problem, is that, you know, when we talk about self-governance, if you don't have control of land and resources on a renewable natural resource basis, you're a slave to the government. And that's exactly where they want to keep us.
And is that where we're at?
That's exactly where we're at. That's where we've been at for almost 50, 60 years in this province. Federally, the Department of Indian Affairs, the biggest farce that ever came down the road. I mean, what we have are Indian organizations funded by the federal government, people funded by the federal government. Now, if I was paying you $100,000 a year, who would you answer to? Probably me, with all due respect. I mean, I don't mean to begrudge or to besmirch your character, but the reality is that most Aboriginal groups in the province of British Columbia are dependent upon handouts from the Department of Indian Affairs. The Department of Indian Affairs created the treaty process corruption. Now, our ideas, Miles Richardson and I and a few of the other leaders that stayed to the end to negotiate it, had the idea that we could have access, we'll negotiate access to renewable natural resources to fuel our own self-government, to make decisions for ourselves, to be citizens of the province of British Columbia. That dream went out the window as soon as the lawyers and consultants and some inept Aboriginal leaders got their foot in the door. And we're talking huge money. I mean, huge money.
So $600 million later, First Nations people have still yet to benefit, while governments and lawyers and others have benefited from this
And the
money.
Treaty Commission. I mean, you talk about treaty commissioners. And the treaty commissioners are living high off the hog. I mean, and I don't begrudge it if they were doing work. You know, I have no problem with people getting paid, provided they produce results. So if I give you a job and you're here, at the end of the day, you're over here where you're supposed to be, you've done your job. But if you're still over here, you should never get paid. And I'm afraid that's what the Treaty Commission is about. It was supposed to be the treaty, the keeper of the process. It was supposed to supervise all of this, but they allowed all of this to go on. And what they became was simply a police dog, watchman for the Department of Indian Affairs. The Department of Indian Affairs controls all of this. Christy Clark does not have a clue what's going on, but it looked like a good soundbite. And she's always there for one of those.
So we only have less than 2 minutes to go. Christy Clark's decision to not appoint a new treaty commissioner, is that a good idea or a bad idea? And where do we go from here?
Well, she might have stumbled on a good idea. Even blind squirrels find a nut sometimes, you know. I mean, but the fact is that what is the summit going to do about it? If I was a summit leader, and if I was an honest federal leader, I don't know where you'll find one of those either, I would demand that the tripartite arrangement of equivalent discussion take place. And I would probably get rid of some of the treaty commissioners, even though one has resigned and left. But I mean, the reality is that unless you tell the government, the federal government, to get rid of it, let's get rid of the Department of Indian Affairs from this process. Let's make it a tripartite process that will create a resolution of land claims and outstanding grievances of the province of British Columbia. We're going to be tied up in the court cases forever. I mean, I wish I wasn't 71. I wish I was practicing law, because I would be taking a whole lot of people to court and stopping development. Not that I advocate that, but that's the reality of the constitutional developments and the court cases and all the things that have taken place to date. Indian people are required to consent. We don't have the right of refusal, but we have to have consent. The industries have to have consent. So Christy Clark has made a huge mistake, but it's one that's been compounded by the NDP government. Mike Harcourt's government was no better. None of the other governments have been any better. And the reality is now we have a huge mess where the title to the land in the province of British Columbia, including maybe the homes upon which you're sitting, is still subject to Aboriginal title and land claims.
You heard it here on Access TV, Hereditary Chief Bill Wilson.